Recording is
okay. Okay, and I'm going to unmute you, sir. I've asked you to unmute Professor Hoxter. Excellent. And we will go ahead and I'm going to put it in a speaker view. Okay. All right. And Julian, does this format work for you?
I would actually prefer it to be in gallery so I can see if people want to talk. But I don't know that. Does that mean that I'm just a tiny face for everybody?
You are for now, but when you share, you'll have more of the screen. You'll have more real estate on the screen.
Okay, fine.
Okay, well, hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to Behind the Curtain and getting the Zoom class started here tonight. My name is Catherine Hecht and I am the Executive Director of the Alexander Valley Film Society. It's thrilling to have you all with us tonight for our screenwriting class with Julian Hoxter. Couple of things before we get started. Let's go ahead and start with our land acknowledgement. The Alexander Valley Film Society, AVFS, recognizes that we are on unceded lands of the Coast Miwok, Pomo, and Wapo. We respectfully acknowledge the indigenous people who have lived here for thousands of years and who continue to contribute in meaningful ways to their communities and our society as a whole. Also, before we get started with the class, a huge thank you to our sponsors and donors who made tonight's class free of charge for anybody who wanted to come. I will put in a link for a suggested donation a little bit later on as we get started. The first thing I wanted to tell everyone about, though, is we are open for submissions. We have 2 new categories this year in our film festival, which runs April 22nd to May 1st. Here is the link. And you can go to our Film Freeway through this link on our website. We're looking for episodic storytelling for the first time this year, and we're also looking for new media micro shorts. In addition to that, we are also on the hunt for screeners. So if you have an interest in being a screener for our film festival, which you can learn more about through that link, I'm going to drop in an email address. You just send an email address to my colleague, Chelsea, and she will put you on the list and we'll be back in touch with a formal application in a couple of weeks. So amazing to have you here. Thank you for being here. I'm not going to take any more time. I want to turn it over to our special guest speaker tonight. I hope you've brought some projects and good questions to talk to him about. Professor Julian Hoxter is with us, the man, the myth, the legend, and a repeat visitor, which we are so grateful for. Professor Hoxter, take it away.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Catherine, and thank you to the Society for hosting me again. It's lovely to be back. I'm not sure if anyone was there for my last talk. If so, I'm sorry. I hopefully will be able to share some insights into very basic screenwriting thinking tonight. I think tonight we're really going to be talking about how to start off with an idea, where ideas come from, and how we might begin to do our thinking to transform something into a story or into a screen story. And of course, a lot of what we talk about will apply to any kind of story. But at the end, I'll say a little bit about how we might begin to think about some aspects of story definition that apply in Hollywood. But I'm going to give a much shorter talk, as I imagine I will, than I did last time. The idea being to have more time at the end for Q&A, either just general questions that you have about screenwriting, or particularly if anyone has an idea trying to kind of transform into a screenplay. And we'll see if we can give some quick help with that. That's always tricky because unless you're very experienced at pitching, it can be difficult to kind of, and stressful to communicate your idea in front of lots of people in a kind of efficient and helpful manner. But we'll see how we go. We'll try and be as helpful as we can for anyone who wants to talk about an idea. or at least the principal idea, if not one that you actually have. It's nice to see some faces or names that I recognize. Hi to, who have we got? Sam and Morgan and Haley and Ken and Kevin and my wife and Sandra. Hello, Sandra. Nice to see you too. And I'm sure I've missed other people, but lovely to see you all here. So, you know, this is an interesting question that we gave ourselves for tonight. You know, how do you get started with storytelling? And I mean, the first thing, before I've got a little presentation or some slides I'll put up in a minute, but the first thing to say, I suppose, is there's a level at which this is deeply personal and deeply individual to every writer. There's a level at which I wouldn't presume to tell you how to come up with an idea. There's a level at which I have no idea how your process works, but maybe you'll tell me in a few minutes' time. So what I'm going to do, let me just share my screen. Let me find it. Where is it? There we go. And we'll start slideshow. So what I'm going to do is perhaps, okay, why is that not? There we go. Oh, no. Okay, why is it? Sorry, it seems to be slightly weird. Let me see if I can do that again. Okay, look, I think we're in business. Yeah, so I'm rather than kind of making the arrogant assumption that I can begin to say how you come to your own ideas, I'm just going to start with some fairly obvious and sort of common sense prompts and just begin to think about, you know, how we can move from them towards story ideas and towards something that is recognizable as a movie. And again, as I say, a lot of these could apply to any kind of story, prose or otherwise. So, you know, and this is also partly really reflecting on my own practice. And indeed, the first two examples that I'll give when we talk about words and images, I'll talk briefly about ideas of my own to show how I've gone from a word, an idea, an image rather, towards a story. Otherwise, we'll just talk a little bit more in the abstract, and hopefully we'll come back to some specifics when we talk to you guys in a little while. So I'm just, this is by far, this is far from a, you know, a complete taxonomy of where ideas come from, but, you know, I think these are 6 starting points that people often, students often suggest to me that they come to or come from in their own thinking about ideas and stories. So stories can start from a word, they can start from an image, they can start from a character or an idea of a character, from an event, from a situation, and those I'm using slightly differently. They do kind of overlap. From a desire, from, you know, somebody who wants something. So let's look at them really briefly, one after another, and just kind of set them up as valid ways of beginning to think about how to move from something towards a story. So first of all, well, okay, a word. Obviously, this could be anything. I mean, the is probably not the best word to start a story from, or you know, but implies drama. But I think maybe it's easier if I just give an example of my own in this case, and just tell you a little bit about how I came to write something very recently. As a matter of fact, I've written a first draft, my very first serial pilot. I've never written a serial drama before, and I have a first draft that I wrote over the summer, which needs a lot of work, but nevertheless, I now have done that, and I'm quite pleased just to have done it. So I had a word, and my word was Heligoland. And some of you may, of course, know exactly what Heligoland is. For others, it might mean nothing at all. And you can now Google it as I'm talking. So Heligoland is a word, I'll explain what it actually is in a moment, but it's a word that I've always loved. And in England, and those of you who hadn't figured out that I was originally from England, you know, put on your thinking caps. In England, we have a phenomenon called on BBC Radio called the fishing forecast, and they give a daily weather forecast aimed mainly at maritime people, so fishermen primarily, but others too. and they divide the sea around the UK into different areas. Fisher, Dogger, they're all called interesting things. I can't even remember. South Utsira, I don't know where that is. But when I was a kid, one of these areas was called the Heligoland Bight. It's now called the German Bight, but Heligoland Bight, and I just loved that term. I didn't know what it was. It just sounded evocative. And about a year or so ago, I came across the word again, and I was sort of intrigued, and I had a little sort of Proustian Madeline moment, as you know, remembrance of lost time, and I looked it up, and that reminded me that Heligoland is a very, very small island, about a mile long, that sits in the North Sea, about 20, 30 miles off the North German coast, between sort of Germany and Denmark, those of you who know the geography. And okay, good. But I read Wikipedia, because you do, right? And I found out that during the Napoleonic Wars, so in the very late 18th through the early 19th century, Heligoland apparently came under British control, and was used as a major espionage and smuggling center by the British and their allies against Napoleon and the continental system. He was trying to blockade all British trade and prevent us from trading. So the British set up on Heligoland, along with their German Hanoverian allies and other people, and did a whole bunch of smuggling and a whole bunch of spying, and a whole bunch of interesting stuff happened there. And I thought, well, what a wonderful place to set a historical drama. You think about the Napoleonic Wars of, battles of hundreds of thousands of men on each side, and Battle of Trafalgar with masses of naval warships and so on. But this could be a way of telling a Napoleonic story that's all about a few people sneaking around and spying and smuggling and doing nefarious things. That's something that, is a way of doing the Napoleonic Wars without a budget of billions. I'm sure it would still be expensive. And that got me thinking, well, wouldn't that be fun? And then from there, I did some research. We'll talk about research in a minute more. I investigate. I read some personal accounts from the period, and so on and so on. And I began to build up the idea of this pilot, which would be a kind of ensemble pilot about different people doing different kinds of sneaky espionage things based on this island Heligoland, which has an interesting history, by the way. I won't go into it now. And there we go. I won't bore you with my story here, but so from one word, a word that resonated with me when I was a kid, and I didn't really know why. I think I had a vague idea that it was an island. I could probably ask my dad. My dad said, well, it's an island. But I didn't know anything more than that. And then it comes back to me. And then I become interested in it. And then I find something out that makes me think, oh, that will be fun. That'll be interesting. I haven't seen that before. And so I go on and write. And whether anything will happen with this particular pilot, who knows? But it's been a really pleasurable experience investigating Heligoland and writing about it. But again, when we're thinking about prompts for storytelling, a word, it can be anything. And that's why I'm offering you my personal example, because this is the kind of thing that is purely personal. The thing that resonates with me. Well, you'll have things that resonate with you, words that resonate with you, and that you find eloquent in whatever kind of way. But that's you can start from things as small as one word. An image. Again, I'm going to get, because images are so personal, I'm just going to give you a personal example here. But this is something that you'll have your own version of. So I had, and I can't remember the context now, but this is now a good few years ago, the image of a young woman floating in zero gravity with the walls of her cramped living space covered floor to ceiling with her own drawings. This came to me. And there's probably, if I went back and, with a therapist and psychoanalyzed it, I'm sure that there was something going on that prompted it. But offhand, I don't remember why. And, we get images, we get all the time. But this one sort of intrigued me. I wanted to know who she was. And I was interested in why I'd come up with this. So anyway, and again, I'll come back to some of the questions that I asked later on in the presentation. I was interested enough to ask this woman, if you will, some questions. And on the basis of that, I wrote a screenplay about it. This was while I was going up for tenure at SFSU. So this is what, 6, 7, or 8 years ago. And the screenplay won a bunch of awards at competitions. Didn't get made because it's, you know, unique and expensive and science fiction, and that's always tricky to sell. And it helped me get tenure. So yeah, great. But the point is, again, thinking about sometimes images come into your head and you dismiss them. Other times they resonate with you for whatever reason or combination of reasons. And this one resonated with me, and I wanted to know more about it, and I followed it up, and I explored it, and it led to a project. And you know, so again, is that directly relevant to you guys and where your ideas come from? Well, maybe in the abstract, but I'm sure you'll have your own stories that you may want to tell us or think about, you know, in due course. But so images come to us, and they're powerful. And of course, cinema, I'm sure it has not escaped your notice, is an image medium, is a cinematic, is a visual medium. And sometimes, you know, we get these moments, these blips of cinema, if you want, internal cinema, and they can be interesting to follow up as well. And then we have characters. And where do characters come from? They come from all kinds of places. You know, sometimes they're abstract. Well, you just imagine somebody, you know, full on, a bit like an image. It comes to your head. Oh, that's an idea for a character, and then you think it through. Or you think of yourself, but in a different context. You know, if I was X, what would I be like? If I hadn't been brought up where I am, but if I've been brought up somewhere else in a whole other context, who might I have become? If my friend, my mother, my school bully, my first lover, my favorite movie character was different in some way, how might that lead to a story? Who are they? What do they want? What's their deal? You know, you begin to ask a question of it, and then you set up the beginnings of logic, which we'll talk about again in a minute. Why are they cool? Why are they frightening? Why are they just fascinating? Why am I interested in them? Why might someone else be interested in them, more to the point? And therefore, why might they be the perfect protagonist or antagonist or supporting character in a story? So again, we come to characters seemingly randomly. We come to characters because we're reading something, we're viewing something that makes us spark and think of something. We come to characters because we ask questions of ourselves or of those who we love, hate, or are in some way invested with, and they can take you somewhere. So, you know, characters come and they speak. And then, of course, you can start by thinking about an event, something big that happens to a city, to a country, to the world. What happens if the aliens invade? You know, there's a question. You know, we have endless alien invasion movies, but you can have it. You have fun by asking yourself, well, okay, how would my alien invasion movie be different? That's often a really fun, abstract, no pressure kind of exercise. If I was making this kind of film, if I was making a movie about this kind of event, this kind of issue, how would mine be different from all the others? And we'll come back to the idea of the hook later on, because what you're talking about there is the idea of a hook, a story hook, something that makes your idea different from everyone else's. But also a powerfully resonant emotional event could happen to somebody, you know. And again, this can come from our own experience. This can come from the experience of our friends or people we know. This can come from the news. This can come from just common sense, understanding of the world. You know, what would it be like if I lost a leg? What would it be like if I got divorced? What would it be like if I had an affair? I'm not gonna. Sorry, I'm aware that I have a certain audience here, but you know, so. All these questions are interesting and in the abstract, and then you know, we can ask, well, what if I? But also, what if someone else? We can think about an event as a driver for characters. We can think about an event as a driver for story. You know, maybe this event is an injustice. Maybe it's a moment of great good fortune. What would I do if I inherited $1 million? Or well, nowadays that doesn't mean much, I guess. Depending on where you are, it might mean everything. It might mean not very much. So what would happen if I inherited $100 or $1 billion? I don't know. Set your scale depending on where your story is set. What would happen if I had suddenly imposed on me a life-changing responsibility? Child, you know, I don't have a brother, but if my brother passed away and, or if I had I do have a godchild in England. God forbid, what would happen if I had to take responsibility for them? My life would change. So all of these things can spark you thinking about stories, not necessarily about yourself, of course, but about other people, about things that you're interested in, and you have something to say, something that has a impact on the world or on people. And again, all these ideas can generate stories. And I'm just ripping through, just giving us a very basic set of starting points, most of which are relatively obvious. We'll move on. So a situation. Well, a situation is also kind of an event, but a situation is more where we have a problem or a challenge, a particular kind of problem or challenge. We have the cliche in movies. We have a situation here. Something's gone wrong. Well, how would we fix that? How would we fix that thing? How do people change the world? How could somebody get into a complex, difficult situation? How can I get out of a complex, difficult situation? So now you're asking questions that lead directly to plot. How would I do something? How would a character do something? These are all questions that go very specifically to plot, and are good starting points for thinking. And again, you might start your thinking with the idea of a desire. In screenwriting, we think of the terms wants and needs. And a want is something, in screenwriting terms, a want is typically something practical. I want some money. A need is something that is more on the level of story rather than plot. It's something more on the level of emotion and so on. So, I need some kind of, it could be anything. I need to grow up. I need to understand that. In fact, having an example below. And so we can think of brighter or darker forms of desire. So brighter desires would include love and friendship and success, maybe depending on how you view success and who you stamp on to get it. Understanding of some kind. Darker desires, are more obsessive. Revenge, even if justified under some definitions, revenge is a darker desire. Domination, power under certain grids, death even. And then from desires, from things we want and things we need, themes emerge for protagonists and antagonists alike. And as soon as we have a sense of a desire, we can transform that into a theme. And a theme is a very powerful thing in storytelling or in screenwriting particularly, because themes are what let you discipline your story. A story is always about one key theme, maybe about other things too, but it's about one key theme, and that key theme stays the same. Your attitude to it may change over the course of storytelling. So we take a love story. That your character may be jaded at the beginning of the movie, and it's done with love, done with dating, done with all that. They've been burned too many times, and then of course they meet Mr. Ms. whoever, right? And suddenly they have to come to terms with the fact that their emotions are taking them somewhere else. So our attitude to our theme may change in a story, but the theme itself doesn't. This is the story about how me, the jaded character, rediscovered love. It's not the story about how I also learned to be a good father. That may be part of the story, or maybe another story. But the key theme in this particular story about me, the character, is love. So one way of thinking about what a theme is that a theme is a desire expressed as something you can do and you can test. So you can test loyalty. You can test growing up or maturing or, taking responsibility or that kind of thing. You can test revenge. Have I got my revenge? Have I not got my revenge? And also, how am I thinking about what revenge means to me? Love on its own tends to be fairly woolly, but you can have it, as I just said, you can have it. Well, what are you saying about love? So commitment might be a story to fatherhood, trust. There are lots of ways of thinking about within the story of love, within a character who is dealing with love as a challenge. Well, what is challenging about it? It's not challenging to fall in love in one sense, but then again, it might be. You know, we can get infatuated, but falling in love is maybe a different thing. Depends how you play your love card in your story. So a desire, a need, a want, something that drives a character or a group or a nation even. A nation seeking freedom from the British colonial oppressor. Although, of course, we're always right. You know, that's a very powerful story of needs, wants and needs. So, okay, so you know, we come to our ideas however we come to them. And again, I'm just ripping through a few quick ones, and we'll talk about your own down the track. But what comes next? We've got the beginning of an idea. We've got the beginning of a thought that may turn into a story. What comes next, I would say, and I'm here using the words of the great anthropologist Mary Douglas, what comes next is taming wild words. Stories are, writing a narrative, writing a story is its process of taming wild words, disciplining your thinking, disciplining your creativity, which doesn't mean diminishing it. It means putting it in the service of the story. And one way of thinking about how we can describe that is the idea of imposing creative logic onto your idea. And creative logic is both creative, as the name suggests, and logical. In other words, it isn't some process of dumbing down, reducing an imaginative idea to sort of, you know, tedious order. On the contrary, it's about thinking about how you can impose a kind of logical form onto it such that we will enjoy it with you. And when we think about creative logic, every starting point, including the ones that we've played around with in the last few minutes, but many others as well, carries with it implied questions. Why, what, how, which, where, when. And every story is basically an example of some kind of causality with a conclusion. Causality, well, you know, cause and effect. Things happen for a reason. That reason may be very practical and obvious and sensible. It may be all bound up into sort of the semi-incoherent flights of emotion. Causality can be different things, and we can understand it in different ways. But for a story to be a story, it has to be something we can follow. It has to be something we can make sense of. Even if we don't necessarily understand everything about it, that's fine. We need to understand enough to understand that it has a purpose and a function, and that carries with it the idea of change or development. So the world at the beginning of your story is not exactly the same as the world at the end, or at least our character has changed so that they don't view it the same way, even if the world itself hasn't empirically changed. And so now we can start asking questions logical questions of all of whatever your starting idea is. And these questions, the answers to these questions, begin to establish a logical causal chain. And that is the beginning of a story, the beginning of a plot. So, you know, so from my example, my image of the young woman in Zero Gravity, well, who is she? Where is she? Why is she there? What's with all the art on her walls? And these are the questions that I ask myself. You answer those questions and you have a character, a situation, perhaps a desire, and more besides. And that's enough to set up the start of the causal chain of the story. So this is the first questions that I asked of my own particular idea. Who is my floating young woman? Well, it turns out that her name, she told me, is Koopy Meeks. Where is she? She lives on a space station, she told me, in orbit below the water world Charybdis 4, at the unfashionable end of inhabited space. This, of course, will be important, but at this point, I haven't asked the questions of what's that all about? What is this planet? What's going on? Why is she there? Well, she's an indentured maintenance worker who owes years of labor to the station. What's with all the art on the walls? Well, that art represents her fantasies of escape, fantasies of a future that she cannot have, and that's desire right there. So suddenly we have a context and a desire. Koopy, my character, wants to get out, but the question is how? And asking how is the start of your causality, the start of your plot. And you know, in this case, it's the start of applying some simple creative logic, in this case, to a single imagined image. And I went in with no preconceptions, and this is really where my imagination took me, but it also placed connections between the answers. And it made a kind of beginning statement about somebody with an attitude in a place with a problem. And if you then follow that logic through, you then have an implicit story. And the implicit story is how do I, the character, deal with that problem, deal with that challenge. And again, this is an idea I had, but obviously yours will be your own, maybe completely different. So, how do we then proceed? Well, we can write what we know. Of course we can. This is obvious, and this is the worst advice you can ever be given by a writing professor. How could you not? You're going to do that anyway. You can interrogate what you know, and that perhaps is interesting, but you're going to do that anyway. So let's much more importantly focus on writing what you don't know, which is also happened to be the title of my first book, written a number of years ago. Now, that's much more interesting, because that then means that you have so many pleasures ahead of you in developing ideas, in taking them in directions that you maybe had not even thought about. And this can come from a range of different ways of approaching the idea. And well, obviously one is research. I mean, there's me in Heligoland. I knew nothing about Heligoland other than it turned up on the weather forecast. And so I read something, and I began with Wikipedia, and Wikipedia intrigued me. So I then read something else, and that intrigued me more, and so on and so on and so on. So I didn't sit down with 93 books to research Heligoland. I started with a word and Wikipedia. And Wikipedia said, yes, you want to read something else. And I read something else. And that told me I wanted to read something more. And I read something more. And then when I began to place these characters, then I had even more specific research that I wanted to do. Well, all right, what would someone like that have been doing? What was their job? How did one sail a boat in that period? What was being smuggled from the island to the shore? All these things. How did the system of lighthouses work? Things I would never ever have thought that I would want to know about or research, and yet I found that I did. But I found that I did organically from developing my idea, and therefore the research was fascinating. And so one of the great things about, well, at least for me, one of the great things about, for example, writing a historical piece, but it doesn't have to be a historical piece, is doing the research, is finding out about things and figuring out how to transform that into story material. And also, for a historical piece, very important, what you can leave to the side. What goes in and what stays in your brain and doesn't have to be communicated in deadly detail to everyone who's watching your film. And then, of course, there are ways of brainstorming. I mean, and you can, if you have a friendly, or a friend or relative or family member, who enjoys that process, that's a great thing to do with someone else. But I also love spider diagrams, and there are also some software packages like MindNode and some others that kind of give you digital versions of this. But where you begin with an idea and then you break it down and see where it takes you. So the little illustration on the side here. So you have a main topic, and then that divides into subtopics and sub ideas and so on, and then often comes back round. So spider diagrams are very interesting ways of allowing your thought to progress, but in ways that have some kind of structural connection. And you can be as creative and as wild in your thinking as you like, but you still need to think about where the line from one idea to the next is. So you're seeing that connection, seeing how it might work. And so, yeah, in short, imagine. But imagine with a little bit of creative causal logic to keep you honest. That's the key. What I think a lot of young writers do is they just allow their imaginations to run riot, which up to a point is wonderful. But it means that they have to do the back think, and to think about how to make sense of everything that they're coming up with in story terms, and how to begin to judge what fits and what doesn't. And this is where experience can help, but also where your logical questions help, and where the fact that if you have a character and the character has goals and the character has a theme, well, then you've got to ask, then you have a question to ask in everything that you invent. And that is that useful in telling my story? this particular story, not a story in the abstract, but this particular story about this character or these characters who want something, whatever that is, or who need something, or who are oppressed by something and need to find a solution. And with all of that and all of that sort of does emerge from write what you know. It emerges from your conventional thinking. It emerges from the things that you're familiar with, but it doesn't necessarily end there. It can take you endless places. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I really don't like the kind of advice that says you shouldn't be allowed to write characters who aren't you. You know, you shouldn't be able to write characters of a different period or ethnicity or gender or species if we're talking about science fiction. You know, I think that's terrible advice. You know, you have to use sense and you have to use judgment, and by all means you need to do research, whether academic abstract research or talking to people, but no, you know, you should be able to write a story about whatever you're interested in and to take that forward, and you know, do it with grace and care, and do it ideally by you know, including those whom it's about in the process if you can. But I don't believe in self-censorship. So yes, write what you know, but push your own boundaries and find a way to expand your knowledge and expand your joy in knowledge. That for me is a wonderful part of writing, creative writing. So, okay, I mean, again, much of this is, you know, not exactly brain surgery. This is just really going over some of the basic ideas about creative thinking and how we might move. But so very simply, before we end, this is just an introduction, just to get us thinking. Well, how does Hollywood understand a story idea? In other words, how do we get from brainstorming and creative causal logic to a logline and a pitch? And the short answer is that we need to conceive and express our ideas to include some more bits of information to what we've already discussed, things like themes and characters. And specifically genre, conflict, stakes, and hook. These are big words in Hollywood. These are disciplining words for our creative storytelling, for our creative causal logic as well. So, well, why are genres important? And not that you have to write in a genre, and you don't have to write a Western, for example. You can write what we might call a drama, a character drama. That's a kind of a genre. Well, genres are a way to shorthand the story context. You know, if you tell me something's a science fiction film, I have a set of parameters that I'm now expecting this story to be part of. And I'm more able and more ready to fit the information that you give me into those parameters and to understand them. And also, for Hollywood, for the industry, TV as well, genre is also an economic measure of audience, or likely audience. Certain genres, you know, make more money, attract more people than others. And this is going to be something that your pitch, your logline will be judged against. You know, if you want to make a horror film, well, there's probably a budget, unless you have, I don't know who, some incredibly famous people who want to be in it, and the buzz is all over the world. There's probably a budget cap, relatively modest budget cap on your horror film, whereas your science fiction epic nowadays, if you can sell the concept to a fear-driven Hollywood, the budget might be significantly higher. The assumed budget might be considerably higher. And so that implies how you're going to write it as well. Well, conflict. Well, drama is conflict. The Greek word for conflict is agon, from which we get the word agony, or the intensity of pain and feeling. Drama is conflict. So what is the source of conflict in your drama? That's something you need to be very clear about when you're thinking about how to express a story idea, you know, in the industry. Where does the conflict come from? Who is the conflict between, or what is the conflict between? And then linked to that, the idea of stakes. That emerges from the idea of conflict. So what is at stake for characters? What is at stake for the story world? If your characters fail at what they're doing, what is going to happen to them, to the world, to their emotional life, whatever's appropriate for your story? And then, and this is a big one for genre movies, you know, what is the hook? We mentioned this a little bit before. So how is your Western, science fiction movie, horror movie, love, romantic comedy, character drama, different from, and ideally cooler than, all other Westerns, insert movie of the kind? So what is the hook? Why is this story fun? How can you, in a sentence, tell me why this story is going to be notably different and notably better than other stories of its kind? How does it turn? It's like this, but, and it's that but that the hook is all about. And so you put all that together, and there are different ways of doing it. And then you have a logline. And a logline is basically the concept of your story in a sentence or two, ideally one sentence. And your logline will either say or imply genre, conflict, stakes, hook, characters, theme. It may not do all 6, but it will do a bunch of them, and it will make it, it'll be such that when I hear your logline, at the end of your logline, I should get your concept, I should get your movie. I don't know what happens in scene 17, but I understand when you tell me what happens in scene 17, how that will fit into the idea of your movie. Okay, so this is the trick. The trick, and of course, and a logline is kind of the beginning of a pitch. A pitch is a longer discussion of your story idea, but it's very much driven by the logline. So the logline is the first statement that you make that makes me go, oh, I see. And then I want to know more. And the logline is the statement that you make that makes me not go, wait, I don't get it. Or how does that fit? Because it should be setting up the key information such that everything else fits seamlessly into the premise that you're explaining to me in your logline. So what is hard, you know, when you're beginning to think as a screenwriter, and when you're beginning to sort of conceive of stories, is to have a logline that does the trick. And sometimes you don't know quite what your script is until you finish writing it. And I know how that goes. But having a logline, having a clearly defined concept which implies conflict and resolution and stakes before you start writing, before you even start outlining in detail, is an incredibly powerful thing. So even if that isn't something that you want to show anybody, or you don't like thinking about these things in industry terms, just in terms of your own writerly discipline and your own ability to keep on track and keep on target with what you're writing, having a logline, having a disciplining statement that you need to hold to, or you need to creatively disagree with and then change if as you write, and as we do, we may find that the story's going in a direction we hadn't anticipated. This is incredibly important and very, very valuable to you. So with those very, very, somewhat woolly introductory thoughts about where a story comes from and how we might begin to think about the kinds of information that we need to invest it with, so that we can then work it forward towards a screenplay, towards a script, or indeed, a novel. Same thing works for a novel. Then what I like to do is shift over to Q&A, and happily take any questions that you guys have in general. But also I'd be very keen if there's anyone who's willing and brave enough to discuss your ideas. But what I would ask you, as much as you can, some of you will, I may have lots of experience and know how to do this, but what I would ask you to do, if you're going to bravely offer us an idea to work with and to help you with, is to try and give me a logline. So your homework in the next 5 minutes is to try and write a logline using some of these ideas. Well, again, you don't have to use them all, or at least be informed by them. A genre, conflict, stakes, hook, character, theme. Who's your protagonist? Who's your antagonist? What is the theme of the film? And then we can talk about it. And this brings me on to one last thing I want to say. And here I'm sure I'm repeating things that I said in my previous talk, which is much more sort of expansive about how you do the screenwriting thing. And that is the difference in for screenwriters between story and plot. And these are terms that we kind of use interchangeably in our everyday lives, but screenwriters use them quite specifically. And here, plot we use to refer to the surface of a story, the events, things that happen. I get arrested for jaywalking, whatever the aliens are right. Whatever whatever the surface action of the film is. And then story is basically subtext. Story is the emotional, personal affect of events that happen, or the things that drive those events. So story is subtext. Story is personal. Story is internal. Story is how I'm dealing with the theme of the story. I, the protagonist, the antagonist. So when you're thinking about how to conceive of a story as a screenwriter, you're thinking about story and plot, and they are separate but very much intertwined. And the example I often give, because I think it's just such a sort of a clear one, is the silly movie 2012, which is all about the Mayan prophecies and California falling into the sea and all that good stuff. And when we've seen the trailer and we go in to see that movie, because that movie is all about special effects and new Noah's Arks and earthquakes and California sliding into the sea, and it's very dramatic and it's full of disasters. But that's not the story of the film. That's the plot of the film. The story of the film is about a failed writer and kind of delinquent dad who tries to rescue his family and prove that he is a good father. This is the John Cusack character, and he can do that. Is that how we were sold the film? No. Do we care about that really? No. We went there to see California fall into the sea. But without that very simple coherence of his struggle to save his family, the whole thing would fall apart. It would just be special effects. It would just be stuff that happens. It would just be Transformers. So the sense in which, however plot-driven your movie, it needs a story. It needs a human need that is being addressed and hopefully fulfilled, or tragically missed. This is something that we have to acknowledge. We have to put in there. So every movie has a story and a plot. And even character-driven movies have some kind of plot. Even mumblecore movies, if those of you who know what mumblecore is, have some kind of plot. People do things. And those things illustrate, if it's a mumblecore movie, they're kind of Gen X anomaly, But so let's break it out then, and let's see, where we might go with our own thinking, and I'd be happy to see if we can do some work on anyone's ideas. But equally, if anyone has any just general questions about screenwriting in general, then I'd be happy to try and answer them, or if I can't answer them, direct you to some resource or someone who may be better able to do so than I am. So thank you for listening to that really brief little introduction, little kind of reminder about the beginnings of storytelling, and then we'll see where we go from here. Do I need to do anything to let people talk, or are we all open? Hopefully we're all open.
No, everyone has the capability of unmuting themselves, so okay, I will let you take it from here.
Excellent.
You do have one there in the chat. Do you see that?
Oh, where's that? Sorry.
From Sasha.
There is no Ken.
It'll be.
We also have. Sorry. Where? Sorry. Maybe you can read it to me. I'm just looking.
Sure. So Ken.
Oh, Ken. Right.
Ken asks, at the risk of accusations of lowbrow taste, should I feel bad about enjoying both Cruella from D+ and a Discovery of Witches series, Emo Vampires plus Witches from Bad Wolf, feature versus episodic seasons?
Hang on, I'm trying to find it. Okay, sorry. Should you feel embarrassed about watching Cruella? No. It's high on my list. Now that it's free, I fully intend to watch it. And also, I love. Oh my god, I can't remember her name. What's her name? The actress.
Emma Stone.
Thank you, Emma Stone. who is awesome. No, I mean, listen, I love everything from weird experimental 60s movies to MCU when they're good. So no, we should love what we love. We should enjoy different kinds of text for different reasons. Why beat yourself up for liking something that you like? You may not want to make it, you may not think something is great art, but I think we have a tendency sometimes to devalue entertainment, and to think of entertainment as a mere escapism, or somehow being cheap. And of course, some entertainment is very cheap, but I don't think we should be embarrassed about liking good movies or good bad movies. Katie, Kate, who have we got here? We have Sasha. Here's a stab. Usually I can get to a long line. My main problem is how to develop the ideas further in order to flesh out the actual beats. Okay, my brain explodes when faced with articles about midpoints and various turning points. And I try to reverse engineer the deal, but get lost and aimless. If I knew the beats to write, I wouldn't feel as crazy with the writing. So it would be helpful to walk through examples of how to flesh out the beats. Okay, here we go. A sadistic orphanage director pits orphan against orphan in a harrowing beauty pageant to see which kids wins a set of parents by midnight. Okay, that's good fun. So the first thing I would check with you, Sasha, is the tone, which I'm assuming is at least blackly comic in this. At least that'll be how I would assume what I would assume it is. And then I would be asking, well, who is our protagonist? Is it one of the kids in the orphanage, or is it an ensemble? And it's about all the kids in the orphanage trying to get, so who is our focus? And then how do you personalize their need? So their need is, well, we assume that their need is to get a family, right? To get a set of parents. But what kind of parents who come to that orphanage to watch this ghastly beauty pageant are going to be worth having? And maybe that's something, if it was me, I'm just riffing on your, Sasha, by the way, everything I say here is just going to be me riffing. I'm not saying this is the way to do something or you should do this. But with me, that immediately opens me up to this kind of story, the kind of story where someone begins the story desperate for something and then realizes that they don't want that thing, or they don't want it on the terms that they're offered it. So for example, you have a young boy, girl, or a bunch of them, who are in this awful place, and I'm assuming it's some kind of Dickensian kind of structure, and they want anything, they'll do anything to get out of this place, right? Because it's run by Miss Gradgrind and everything is terrible. They have to do this thing, and then somehow their attitudes will change. And is it better to be myself in a bad situation and look forward to another kind of solution than it is to effectively, I use the word with care, prostitute myself to a family who's only interested in my surfaces and not my depths? And what are they going to offer me anyway? Or that happens and then they have to adjust in this family. So I don't know, that's where I would begin to think about it. So I would begin to think about it, and you may or may not agree with that as a conception, but I would think about it in terms of, what is the theme here? Is the theme about freedom, for example? I must get out of this terrible place. Is the theme about family? I want to find a family, but how do we define family, right? An obvious example would be here. Family is the external thing that we have to preen and primp ourselves up in this horrible way to get. No, family is the community we have amongst ourselves, our fellow orphans, right? I mean, that would be a very conventional way of, but not bad way of doing that kind of story, right? And so the attitudes would change, but the notion of what a family is might change, but the theme is still family. Or is the theme something quite different that I haven't even thought about? So that would be how I would begin to do it. I would begin to say, well, what is the theme? And how does the character's relationship to the theme change during the story? Let me give you a very, very Hollywood version of this. a very conventional, and when I'm saying conventional, by the way, that doesn't mean in my way is bad. I mean, I'm just saying that as a way of explaining how a lot of people think about it. And you can be very creative within conventions. So this isn't a shorthand for conventional. A very Hollywood way of thinking about this would be to say that a character's arc, a character's progression through a story, can be measured against the theme by 3 key beats or moments of change. And those beats, there are two variations: either accept, reject, sacrifice, or reject, accept, sacrifice. So often Hollywood movies will start by, whatever the theme is, whatever the idea is, you start with a character who is either totally against it or totally for it. And then during the course of the story, their experience leads them to change. And having been for it, they're against it, or having been against it, they're for it. And then at the end, they will offer themselves in sacrifice, literally or metaphorically. It doesn't have to be death, but it can be the end of hope, for example, could be a kind of sacrifice. And they will offer themselves in sacrifice to not get that thing because it's the right thing to do. And in so doing, will get it. That's a very Hollywood structure. And again, I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just offering that again as a kind of a model to test your ideas against, however you're thinking about these kids in this orphanage. And then we will also ask about the antagonist. So there we begin to see beats. We're beginning to see beats as change of your character's attitude in relation to the theme of the story, which you can conceive in a much more complex way than I've just described it, or not, right? But then the question is, well, where's the conflict? Well, one area of conflict obviously must be with the horrible person who runs the orphanage. Well, what do they want? What do they think they're doing? Do they think that they're evil, or do they think they're doing the right thing? Are they just sadistic and they're like, yeah, I'm just going to fuck with these kids, excuse my language. Or do they think that no, kids need to be presentable and such in order to survive in the world? So I must be hard on them and make them into the perfect little darlings ready to be taken away into a good home, right? Which is misguided and terrible, but not evil necessarily. It's something that, for example, that character might learn a lesson. Do you want them to? I don't know, but I'm just offering that as a model, because then we have an antagonist who maybe has an arc as well, right? And it isn't just the monolith, it isn't just the monster to be defeated. You can have monsters, that's fine, but I'm just giving ways of thinking about it. So then with that concept, and of course another option would be a family, right? So one of the kids gets the family. And then is that a good thing or not? Well, in my conception right now, it's probably not a good thing. And now they're from the frying pan to the fire and they want to escape back to their friends. In my imagination of your story. But then we have things to do, places to go, attitudes to change. And so not only from the perspective of the kids, the students, but also from the perspective of, the antagonistic forces, however defined. And while we're talking about that, it's a very important point that in a story, antagonist does not mean evil necessarily. An antagonist might be evil. They might simply have a different opinion than you. Yeah. They might just be somebody who sees the world differently, and not necessarily wrongly either. But because they see the world differently, and because they see, or they think that they understand what's best for you, the character, differently, well, that'll create conflict. But that's not the same thing as them being necessarily evil. Yeah, parent-child relationships are often framed in this way in stories, for example. But that's just one example. So, I don't know. Sasha, was it? I believe. Sasha, I don't know whether that makes any sense. I don't know whether that's something that those initial thoughts of mine are ways that you can begin to start to think through your story. But yes, there are certainly, I'd be happy to do a workshop that goes in real detail on models of feature film structure. But just the basic thinking, the basic causal logic from the little presentation that you can apply when you're asking, well, all right, what is the theme? How does the character's attitude to that theme change? And how does that imply action? And then the same for the antagonists. that's already maybe, and again, you can have a totally different conception of the actual plotting of your film, but even just in the way that I'm beginning to think about its potential, I can already see important story moments. And it's quite appropriate if you go, well, okay, here are my key moments. I've got to have a moment where my character, for all the bad in this place, desperate to get out, will do anything. Then I've got the moment when they go, oh no, and I'm leaving my friends behind, and I'm rethinking. And then there's the right. So that begins to put in these big signposts. So even if you aren't thinking at this point about 3-act structure and rising action, all these storytelling cliches that we have, you're already putting in key signposts for storytelling without having to take on the burden of all the other models and thinking. Sasha, does that make any sense?
Absolutely, it does. Thank you so much. It's really helpful also to think of it the way you termed it, with regards to the beats reflecting the theme. That's very helpful to me. And yeah, I really like the causal logic module. So I really appreciate your expertise. It's very helpful.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, I think, look, again, all we're trying to do here is to sort of ask ourselves, what is our starting points for thinking? How can we begin to link wherever our idea came from? How can we begin to link it to discipline? And I'm not talking about, spanking your idea until it's nothing. I'm talking about how you can make it sing by giving it structure. And you start with some logical questions and logical answers. And then if you want to then go back and read whoever's book, and we all basically say the same thing, we call beats different things, but we're basically saying the same thing. It's Monk's game, then that's fine. But you've already got quite a long way with logical questions and logical answers, which won't take you wrong. And you build around it. Or you just, keep asking yourselves the good questions and write. Okay, let's move on. Let me just quick. I see you, Morgan. I'll come to you in a second. I'm just seeing if we have anyone else from the chat. I don't want to miss people. We have, I think, is this Katie? Question. I'm interested in finding work as a script reader analyst as a way to improve my writing skills. I'm wondering if you're at all familiar with that line of work. I am. I was an intern at Linda Obst Productions when I was we did, I don't know, Adventures in Babysitting and a whole bunch of things when I was a film student many years ago. How do you get your foot in the door if you have other ideas of ways to improve screenwriting skills? Okay, that's a great question. I think in terms of getting unless you have experience that makes you able to kind of set up on your own bat, and that people might want to buy into that. I would say if you can get an internship with a producer, with an agency, and so on, that's one very good way of doing it. Because then they will ask you to read coverage, to write coverage. And coverage is basically analytical reports on screenplays that are submitted for the agency. And indeed, you can begin to do that yourself. And there are books that you can get on how to. I can, if you want that. I'm sure that Catherine and Tess can pass an email on from you or to me, and I can find you. I can't remember the title now, but there's a useful book on how to write coverage, which I can recommend to you. I can't remember what it is offhand. I haven't thought about it for 10 years. But I think, the easiest way of doing it, yes, is to have some kind of role within a company where that's happening. And often students from our program and other programs, get internships with those kind of companies. And usually, of course, the difficulty is that a lot of them are down south in Southern California, but not all of them. And with Zoom and so on, I mean, that's something that you might think about. The problem, of course, is if you're not in education and you can't be given course credit, it's not legal for them to not pay you anything. So that's a trick you'll have to think about. But in terms of how to get experience, I mean, the other thing that you might really think about is joining a writing group. And writing groups are dangerous, very dangerous. But the right kind of writing group where you have people who know what they're talking about and are constructively rigorous but supportive, is amazing. The wrong kind of writing group, where either people don't know what they're talking about and you're getting useless feedback, or where it's all about ego, or it's all about some kind of weird social experiment, which some of them tend to be. Be careful, run a mile. But writing groups are can be very useful, and you can certainly take extra classes in screenwriting and so on, which can give you more experience. The other thing that I think is very helpful is just to read screenplays. Just read and read and read. And target screenplays in areas that interest you, but also read screenplays from other genres. I'm not a fan of romantic comedies, but I read romantic comedies. They teach me a lot. Sometimes I read them through gritted teeth, but that's just me. I mean, you'll have your own genres that you like and hate, but it can be very, very helpful. And sometimes you learn more from a genre that you aren't necessarily in love with, because you tend to be more analytical and critical of the storytelling, and there's less of a chance that you just fall in love with the story and go with it. So I don't know, all these things, but I think Katie, if you are, I don't know whether you're a student or not, but if you aren't a student, it's tricky to get an internship. And so I would then think about how you can just get more experience as a writer and get more people to critique your work as a writer. And the more that happens, then the more I think you begin to understand what you're doing and what you're not doing. And there are other things you can do, like entering competitions with shorts or features that you've written, but that's a bit of a lottery. But I mean, at the risk of being that guy, the best way to get better at writing is to write. The certainty of being that guy. But seriously, the more you write, the easier it becomes. And if you can find someone or a group who can give you rigorous criticism, then that's the best possible way forward. I'm afraid there's no kind of easy way to fit in, but the more you write, the more text that you have, the more shorts, the more features that you have, the easier it is to show that you have some kind of ability, and therefore may find people who are interested in working with you. If you're down south, maybe if you can get a job as a PA or something on a set and meet people, and then if you get a job as an office PA, well, then maybe they'll be interested in having you read stuff there. But right now with COVID, it's a bit tricky. Okay, let me. Sorry, I do see you, Morgan. I will come to you. I'm just seeing. So, okay, Daniel has. Here's another stab. I got the idea from my own personal experiences after watching Knives Out and 12 Angry Men, along with true crime cases. I was then inspired after reading an article about how Knives Out updates Agatha Christie's style of mystery. Yes, that's right. With modern archetypes. Logline: being a part of a jury for a murder trial, a young Asian American man tries to convince the men and women of the jury, diverse in Asian jobs, to return a verdict of not guilty due to reason of insanity against the objections of older jurors who related to the murder victims who were abusive tiger parents against their kids. Okay, interesting. Okay, I like where that's going. I like the idea that you have like a generational conflict and a loosely a cultural ethnic within a cultural ethnicity that we haven't kind of seen before, and that you're kind of expressing it in that way. I think the danger here is that well, where is the truth? I think that if the truth, is this person, okay, all right, version one, he sees the truth and nobody else does, and he has to get through old people's prejudice, because old people are all prejudiced. Okay, that's version one. Version two is he thinks he sees the truth and he's arrogant, but actually maybe he doesn't, and maybe he's assuming that these older people are blinkered or blind to what's really going on, but maybe they're not, or some of them are not, right? So maybe it's a lesson he has to learn a different way. He assumes, he goes in with a kind of youthful arrogance. So there are different ways of thinking about how that might play out. But I mean, can you update 12 Angry Men? Sure. Yeah, absolutely you can. I guess I would say that the case needs to be significant in order for it to resonate. You know, it needs to be about something. It needs to be a big case. But yeah, sure. Sasha. Okay, Sasha asks quickly, which screenplays have you read that helped you specifically with understanding structure? Rom-com comedy suggestions are great. Okay, Little Miss Sunshine is great. It's a huge question. I mean, I don't. For me, I'm actually read screenplays more for style. I'm interested in them more nowadays as examples of this weird hybrid literary style that we have as screenwriters. I don't tend to read them. I think I'm pretty set in my own understanding of how I tell stories. Doesn't mean I can't learn things, but in general, I tend to learn to read them to see how, you know, someone who I like, a movie that I've liked, I want to see how that story is expressed on the page as an actual exercise in storytelling, as opposed to, you know, am I learning what beat comes where? So I don't think I quite use them in the way that you do. But I would start by finding a script that you, a movie that you admire in one way or another, and relatively recent as well. I mean, if you go back to the 30s and 40s, screenplays were written in a very different format. There really were lists of shots. So you know, more recent film, but one that you admire, and admire includes, you know, it tugged on your heartstrings and made you laugh. It was a romantic comedy, and do so successfully, and you thought the characters were, you know, well drawn, and then just follow it, see how it tells its story, and, you know, try and identify when you read through it, well, where is the beat? And by beat, I mean the significant story movement, where something happens that significantly advances the story. And think about, well, okay, what is the theme here specifically? Not just love, but, you know, what is it? And how are the characters' attitudes to that changing? How is opposition? How is the antagonistic forces playing here? Is it the two partners who are against each other? Is there the best friend trying to split them up? Is it, you know, the strict family? You know, what's going on here? Is it that the fact that the protagonist has a fear of commitment and isn't able to commit, and is again basically they're their own antagonist? You know, so all these are questions that you can ask yourself, you know, and begin to move forward. Okay, Judy has Logline, A Homecoming. Oh, we've got so many. All right, okay. A Homecoming. Sorry, Taiwanese American Boya finds it. I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. Finds it her duty to modernize her parents' overly religious hometown. Well, that's a lot. But okay. But aliens who know the real value of the village's religious icon are on the move to steal it, which may endanger the earth. Okay, fine. All right. Well, what's good about that is you've done the story plot thing, right? So she goes home with a mission, you know, to wake the community up and get them out of their old-fashioned thinking, and so on, right? And then there's aliens, right? That's great. So you have the story and the plot. That's fun. I like it. And then what we then want to see, of course, or what we assume we're going to see, is that where there has been conflict, generational conflict, ideological conflict of faith or no faith or whatever, then they have to come together to defeat the aliens, or the aliens factionalize them further or whatever. And that, again, can be fun. Taiwanese versus aliens. There you go. There's your movie title. Can't be worse than Cowboys versus Aliens anyway. That's a terrible film. Okay, Mercedes. A young girl is forced to grow up quickly when she's put in custody of her loving but self-destructive father. Right. So she has to become the parent, would be the kind of story assumption there.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So again, I think, you know, what we'd want one or two more bits and pieces of information, like why the father is self-destructive, because when we know why, I mean, this is, you know, Freudianism 101, right, which we take with a pinch of salt. But when we know the causes for that self-destructiveness, we know whether it's something that actually can be solved or not, and how. So part of this is kind of an emotional detective story, I'm guessing, where she's got to figure out, well, what's really at the heart of this? Why is my dad like this? Who can I talk to find out about it? How can I deal with him? And that can be everything from funny to emotionally devastating, you know. But then, you know, so then it becomes this process of understanding, and then where does that understanding leave you? And depending on where it leaves you, that moment of understanding could come in a whole range of different places in the story. For example, it could be the just before the I'm using screenwriting terms, but it could, for example, be just before the midpoint, where the daughter, yes, the daughter, no, sorry, no, yes, the daughter realizes what's actually at stake here, why the father is like they are. And then they got to make this big decision. Well, can I actually do anything about this? Or do I just need to, it'll drag me in and I'll get destroyed by it too? Or is that a risk? But then they make the decision to try. Or it could be something that is a terrible revelation near the end. And then the film ends at the horrible realization that the daughter can't help him. Or, so there are lots of ways that you can play that process that leads to her understanding of what needs to happen, if anything can happen. And that how you pace the story and how you plan the reveals, how you plan the her coming to knowledge and understanding. There's no right or wrong. Then depending on what you want to do with it, how you want it to end, that moment could come at lots of different points in the storytelling. But yeah, I mean, it's an archetypally interesting and challenging kernel for storytelling. But it can go again depending on what you want the outcome to be. Everything from happy and positive to everyone dies. The pacing of that storytelling could be very, very different. And the process of narration, the process of storytelling, the process by which the characters and we obtain information and understanding such that we're able to act on it, could be very, very different. Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's helpful.
I mean, that's just, again, look, I'm just trying to rip through as many as I can and say something, come back to me if you want, by all means. Sam. Hi, Sam. Logline. A young woman's grandfather passes away and leaves her the deed to a ghost town. Okay. In the American South. They're great. I love all these ideas. In the American Southwest. When she visits the town to check it out, she finds it still inhabited by the ghosts of the people who were living there in the 1880s. Fun. And my big first question was why? Okay, Morgan, I will take you next. Yes. So why? Why are they hanging around? I mean, again, ghost cliche 101 is they're waiting around until they, are able to move on, right? So what is holding them there? Why are they there? And when you know that, well, then you know what your plot is. That you've either got to solve that, or the other version is, particularly if it's more of a comedy, the other version is, well, okay, the ghosts are actually quite happy being there and they're doing their thing, and just leave them alone. They'll be fine. I don't know what you want to say with your story, but the issue then is also one of tone. What kind of a story is this? What happened in the 1880s? What is this event that basically killed them, or they didn't survive, and that has stopped them going forward, if that's how you conceive of ghosts? Or does this just become then, I'm in a ghost town and they all want to kill me and I've got to get out, it becomes survival horror. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where you want to go with it, but it's certainly intriguing, Sam, we will come to Morgan in a moment, but Sam, give me one more clue as to that. What's the deal here?
Sure. I don't know how you feel about an X meets Y style of pitch.
Okay, X meets Y is a cliche, but it can also be very efficient. Give us an X meets Y.
Northern Exposure meets Scooby-Doo.
I'm in your audience.
All right, cool.
I'm sitting there in your audience right now, asking myself, why isn't this film made? Okay, I quite like Northern Exposure. Scooby-Doo is the best thing ever. The cartoon before Scrappy-Doo, I must hasten to add, when Scrappy-Doo comes, no, not even. Okay, but then, but what's the deal then? Are they really ghosts, or are they? Is it all old Mr. Smith who wants to scare the tourists away? What's going on?
Yeah, I think they're really ghosts, but I haven't quite figured out the why yet.
You need a why. Yeah. When you have a why, you have a story. Until you have a why, you have a situation. To go back to where we were, right? Do you guys get this? This is exactly what I see. This is a very cool situation that Sam has. There's this person and he goes to a ghost town and there are real ghosts. Yeah, that's the situation. Okay, but why, when you apply causal logic, why are they there still? What do they want? What's going on? As soon as you give me that, then that gives him something to do, other than just go zoinks. Jinkies, I believe is the other one. Okay. Morgan, go.
All right. So I got a log line that I'd like to share that I consider, I think is pretty good, but I'm all right with you telling me otherwise. But anyways,
All right.
so the log line goes, undeterred by his failure at police academy, a young man dedicates himself to becoming the badass bounty hunter of his fantasies.
Okay. So this is Dog the Bounty Hunter, but with better hair. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, again, is it a well, what is it? Is it a comedy? Is it it sounds like a comedy.
Yeah, I sort of was, because I imagine, because this is actually like a feature screenplay I've been writing about like this guy who like he fails at police academy and but like he really idolizes like Clint Eastwood.
Okay.
And so I thought it would like poke fun at like
right.
our thoughts.
But what's the tone? I mean, is this like a gritty, violent movie, or is this
no.
He's
I do
basically
imagine
dumbass,
it,
right?
Yeah, he's sort of a dummy,
Right. Okay, fun. It's a fun concept, right? So it's the failed policeman wants to become the Uber policeman, and he does that through bounty hunting. That's a great concept. And there's a bunch of comedy actors who'd want to do that. But so then the question becomes, is this about him learning that he really needs to get a life in a major way and not do this? Or is this about him actually showing that despite all of his failings and flaws, he actually is quite good at it, and becoming sort of justified at the end? I mean, where in your mind, where is this going?
About him sort of, he learns to grow up with his life.
Right. Okay. So he tries to live out his fantasy, and then the film is going to offer him, or at least he's going to earn himself an alternative way, and a more mature way of seeing himself in the world.
Yeah.
Good. There you go. There's your arc, right? Your arc from I want to be Clint Eastwood to I'm a little bit less of an idiot. I say that with love, right? I mean that's fun. And then you build a cast of so the theme is growing up, or at least one way of thinking about the theme is growing up. You may have it a different term. I know, Scoop. Yeah. But the dog wants to go out. Yes, Betty, I know. He's like nudging me. And then you think about, well, okay, how can you build a cast of characters who are going to test him out, right? Can he be this fantasy of it that he has? What are his alternatives? Who is he talking to? Who's he falling in love with, or whatever? What other career paths might he actually be much better, set for, or none? Where do you want us to leave him, and so on. So again, this gets you you have a really, really good character as a starting point for your idea, right? A character, the guy who believes he should be something but he shouldn't be, right? That's great. So now you need to apply causal logic to the theme and say, well, okay, who is going to be putting different kinds of pressure or offering different kinds of lessons, opportunities, and so on to him? And how will they fit with that theme of growing up, right? Everything from his mum, who is always, oh, I like that Clint Eastwood, you should be like him, or whatever, to, for some reason I went Monty Python there, I don't quite know why, to, a potential boy girlfriend or whatever, to an old cop he meets who can give him some advice, to, I'm inventing, people for you, there you go, but, but
what I've thought of
focus. I'll come to you. Open you 1 second. But focus on that theme. Everybody and every key storytelling moment should be directed to you telling that part of that story, right? The story where he comes to understand who he really is, not what he fantasizes he is. That's a great Hollywood story. Okay. You can say that. Go ahead. You wanted to say, then I should move on. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say that like the character that sort of foils, or not quite foil, but is like that, sort of like wants to steer him in the right direction, is like he has like this sister who is like an actual badass, and she's like,
okay, right, so he wants to be like his sister. It gets better. Cool. And his sister might be just a full badass, or she might be terrified every time she goes out and just puts on a good mask, and then when he realizes that, he's learned something. I mean, I don't know, you know, I mean, fun. Okay, I'm going to move on because just to make sure we give other people time. But
thank you so much.
Hey, oh, hello, Haley. Say nice things. Thank you. Haley, who's gone, I think. Northern Exposure and Scooby-Doo, yes, indeed. Well, anyway, Haley's gone, but hi, Haley. Everyone has fun ideas. Okay, we have lots of Scooby-Doo stuff. The dog's name is not Scoob, no. But the dog's name is Scoot. In fact, not Scoob, Scoot. Well, he's one of my dogs. The other dog is called Monroe. Now you know facts and information about my dogs. Years later, I have a log. Okay, Ken, did you want to give us your logline? Oh, Humbug. Oh, here we are. Okay, Humbug Wizard fleeing. Oh, I know this one. This is the story that you wrote with me like 50 years ago, I guess. Humbug Wizard fleeing the chaos of his crumbling empire is compelled by the land's most powerful sorceress to defeat an external threat to her supreme power. He must become an actual magician to be worthy of an alliance with her against the forces which struggle for supremacy in the magical land of Oz. Well, okay, there you go. I mean, it's a story about the Wizard of Oz, I assume, and it's you've already got your challenge. He's got to actually realize what is a real wizard, not a humbug. That's great. Humbug, you know, immediately I'm thinking of P.T. Barnum. Immediately I'm thinking of you know, how you can kind of create a real magic out of flim flam. That could be an interesting idea. Is he finding, I'm thinking, is he finding a new way to make magic that works for him, because the regular ways of making magic in Oz don't work for him because he's an outsider. You know, so how is he, how is he P.T. Barnuming it, but actually for real? That's my first instinct. I don't know enough about Oz to be clever about Oz. I mean, I've seen The Wizard of Oz, but and read the first book. So that challenge to become a real boy is fun. I like that. And again, you know, what you've got at the heart of that story is a very powerful character need, right? He needs to be the one thing he can't be, but he's pretended to be all his life. It's kind of a weird inverse of Morgan's idea. I like that. I think that's got oodles of potential. I see Catherine has appeared in person now, which means that I must shut up. But let me just see if I can get one more quick idea. Oh no, Catherine's saying the things. Take care, folks. Okay, I think we're at the end. Okay, listen, we zoomed through a lot of people's ideas. All of these ideas, let me just say, if I can, just one thing in summation. All of them had something. All of them had questions that needed to be asked of them in order to sort of fully understand where they're going as stories. But that's completely normal, right? That's, you know, how do we get to a story? Well, we get to a story often by, you know, by asking it questions, by asking our idea questions. And sometimes we can do really well with a little information. Other times we have to have very important pieces to do much at all. So for example, with Sam's idea, which sounds like it's got oodles of potential to be real fun, right? The guy who turns out, or the person who goes to the ghost town and they're real ghosts, right? That's a very good idea, but I can't do much with it until I have the why. And that's not for me to give, right? That's for Sam to give, for example. But there are other people who, you know, we could actually begin to extrapolate. Sasha's idea, for example, with, you know, relatively little information. There's the beauty pageant and the orphanage. Well, we can begin to do quite a lot of work with that, right? But then again, when we come back to Sam's idea, we would think about, well, all right, why is this person the perfect person to deal with whatever's going on with the ghosts? So version 1 of Sam's next step is finding out the why for the ghosts. Version 2 of that is to find out the why for the human being and make the ghosts fit what he or she needs in order to have an interesting story outcome. And then the thing begins to merge. All right, anyway, I'll be quiet now. Hopefully you guys got something from that bit of fun. I know we didn't take people's ideas anywhere near as far as they deserved, but hopefully you got the beginnings of a couple of questions to ask. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for your fun ideas. You know, I always love doing this kind of stuff. I wish we had more time, and I'll shut up.
Oh, I wish we could go on much longer. Thank you everyone for being here and contributing as you did. Julian, thank you again for being with us tonight. stay tuned. We'll send everybody who was here tonight. I don't have the details right in front of me, or I'd tell you, but for our next arts and lecture series, which is coming up in October, actually it's going to be October 20th. Yeah, nope, don't listen to me. I'll get the date wrong. But thank you again for being here. Thank you to our donors and sponsors for making this possible. We'll have the recording ready and make sure you get a copy of that as well. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you all. I'm sorry. Thank you all.